side of the moon, we have LOS for approximately 21 minutes. Okay, Frank, you ready for LOS?
The theme that I'm going to talk about today is simply putting information before you that you wouldn't normally get through mainstream channels. It's not something that I'm trying to sell to you. It's not something I'm trying to get you to believe, because the world is drowning in fricking people standing up and telling others what they should think. Whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's science, whatever it is, medicine, we're constantly being told, this is how it is, you must believe it, and if you don't believe it, you're wrong. So all I'm doing tonight is putting information before you, and what you make of it not only doesn't matter to me, it's none of my sodding business what you make of what I say. It's your business. And so I just want to emphasize from the start that I'm not here to get you to believe anything. Just to say there is another way of looking at this thing called life and world events as we hurtle by the day much more than ever appears in the mainstream media towards Orwell's society. Gandhi said, an error does not become truth by reason of multiplied propagation, nor does truth become error because no one will see it. He also said, even if you are in a minority of one, the truth is still the truth. The truth is not something you believe, the truth is something that is. And it's your relationship to it that is the decision we make. Obviously, there are different versions of truth, and there's different ways of looking at life. But truth itself is not something we believe, it is something that we align with or don't align with. So, in short, if one person is standing up and saying something, it doesn't mean it's not true. Just because everybody seems to be saying the same thing doesn't mean it is true. There was a time when, if I'd have stood here centuries ago and said the earth was round, guy's a nutter. What are you talking about? And it's interesting that if you want to suppress someone's sense of what's possible, all you need to do overwhelmingly is to suppress the information they receive about what is possible. And then boom, box. So, the earth's not flat, it's a sphere. Level of information. You're mad. What about the people on the bottom? They fall off. Introduce more information. Law of gravity. The apparently ridiculous now becomes possible. The difference between the two, the level of information. So he who controls information controls our sense of possibility. Hence what he was talking about. The world seems so utterly confusing. It seems so complex, so bewildering. What's this? What's that? How's that? What's going on? And the reason it seems so bewildering and so complex is because we lack the level of information in the mainstream, where most people get their information from, to understand what's going on and how the parts fit together. Because that's what I'm going to do tonight, and it's what I do in a massive way in this book, which is quite heavy, because things can look in isolation interesting. Oh yeah, what's going on here? Wonder what that's about. And why is he doing that? And what's this event here? Why has this happened? But when you go boom, 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 and connect the dots, suddenly, oh, so that's what's going on. Connecting the dots is absolutely crucial. And I started 20 years ago on a quest to understand two things. The nature of life. Who are we? What are we doing here? And who really controls world events and what we call society, and to what end? And of course we all start out with this complexity and this bewilderment, but when you start connecting the dots, what's going on becomes the proverbial elephant in the sodding living room. World events, overwhelmingly, the major ones that change society and move us in a certain direction, are not by accident but by design. I often hear people say, do you believe in the conspiracy theory of history or the cock-up theory? As if, like, you've got to choose. Some things that happen in the world are cock-ups, mistakes that people have made. Oh, didn't mean that. But within that are coldly calculated changes in society, which are now becoming daily so obvious, to take the power over the global state, because that's what they want, and that's what they're flying towards by the day, in the hands of a ludicrously few people. This is a famous saying, of course. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. I know that one. I got that one. Early 90s. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. Again and again, you see this process. And what's happening now, because when I started out talking about this nearly 20 years ago, I was talking to more chairs than bloody people. And on May the 24th, I'm talking at the Brixton Academy, 2,500 seats, was sold out 3 months in advance. Now, that is the difference, encapsulated really, in the way that more and more people are beginning to say, this is starting to make sense of the world. They're starting to see that the world is not just a little bit not like we thought it was. It is nothing like we thought it was. Now, I have this little thing that I do. If you get too close to something, you can get so caught up in it that you lose perspective. And I always say to people, take a deep breath, take a step back, look at it again. And you can start to see things you couldn't see before. Who do you think is going to win the presidency? Doesn't matter. So we have this thing in America, anyone can become president. Because that's why it's the land of the free. Well, anyone can become president as long as they've got the people that control the media and the money behind them. Anyone else? No chance. And now we've got a choice. It is said, I use the word choice, I stand back in amazement, between, it seems, these three people. All of them connected to the same network that I'm talking about tonight. All different masks on the same face, apparently offering choice. Barack Obama, he's talking about change. Change you can believe in. The person behind his campaign is Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski. This is the man who was the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, who a couple of years or so ago came out publicly and admitted that he had led the Carter administration to manipulate and entice the Soviet Union into Afghanistan for the occupation that led to the the war, millions of dead people, and came out the other side with the Taliban and all the other stuff. He is the man behind Barack Obama who's talking about being against war. It's a scam. And people supporting that guy are going to be desperately disappointed if he makes it to the White House and what really he's there to do comes through. Because this is the point. We are watching on the television news and in the media in general, we are watching a movie. A movie to give us the impression that we have freedom, that we have choice, when there's one force behind the apparent different people in the movie. And it's the same, not just within countries, but between countries, where you have the same force manipulating apparently different countries to the same end. It's not some kind of miracle of coincidence that a Labour Prime Minister was hand in glove with a Democrat President Clinton, and then when they change over there, he becomes equally, if not more, connected to a far-right Republican president in George Bush. It's because Bush and Clinton are controlled by the same network. Blair, Brown, all of them are controlled by the same network, and so they work to a common aim. And these people are far more frightened of the network than they are of public opinion, which is why Blair went massively against public opinion and caused himself enormous grief in terms of his popularity, because that was more acceptable to him than going against the network. They say that Blair was a puppet of George Bush. The fact is, they're both puppets of a force that controls both of them. Same in this country. We have this, what we have is this sleight of hand. And it works like this. The greatest form of dictatorship is a dictatorship where the people think they are free, because they will not rebel against not being free when they think they are. You can talk about fascist dictatorships and communist dictatorships, but where you have a dictatorship that the people can see, touch and taste, where they understand the situation they're in, those kind of dictatorships have a finite life. It might take some time, but they have a finite life because the people know the situation and they can see who the controllers are. The greatest form of control is the prison without the bars, because people will sit there forever because they don't think they're in a prison cell. And one of the ways that they scam this is having two parties overwhelmingly in most countries, and they just keep changing them every now and again. And when the party is in government, it introduces the agenda for further and further centralization of power. The opposition party opposes it. Oh, we have choice. Then there's a farce called an election, and the two parties change sides. Now the party that was opposing centralization of power is in government, it's introducing it. The party that was introducing it in power is now opposing it. Oh, we have choice. And the other thing they do is if they want a certain person in power, like they wanted Blair, and like they wanted Margaret Thatcher, then all they do is create mayhem in the opposing party. And people say, well, there's no choice. Don't like him much, don't like him much. But what's the choice? How many times in the last 10 years do people say, well, I don't want to vote for Blair, but look at the Tories. They're a mess. So where's the choice? That's how they scam it. And when Cameron comes in, it's Blair Mark II under another name. And so in America, those people who are understanding it, they have this phrase, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. And when the government gets in, the agenda for centralization of power gets in. Politics may not be the oldest profession, but the results are the same. For the reason I'm talking about. Now, this is all possible because we have allowed ourselves, as human beings, to become a herd of unthinking sheep. We've been manipulated to be so, and only by acquiescing to it is it possible for the few to control the many. We're fed the movie constantly. I worked in journalism for years. You know what investigative journalism is today? It's watching the newsroom telly and reading the morning papers. This is what so many humans have allowed themselves to become. And when we do, when we acquiesce to the herd mentality, then the few can control the many. And it's happening on a bigger and bigger scale. I hear people, you know, they get caught in this movie about, oh, well, what, are we going to vote for him? And do you think it's going to, and what about Clinton? And what about Obama? And what about Brown? Do you think you vote for him? What's his policy on this? And it's like, deep breath, take a step back, look at it again. Oh, it's a piece of shit. Yeah, exactly. That's all it is. That's all it is. And when you start to realize that, the pennies start to drop, and you see that what is apparently, you thought before, random events, are actually coldly, calculatedly connected to lead us down this road to Orwell's state. Oscar Wilde said, most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives are mimicry, their passions are quotation. All the time, we are repeating and seeing repeated what other people have said. And you hear things like, everyone knows that, mate. Well, I don't know that, so there's one less than everyone. We've made a start. How did you know that? Oh, well, I heard a so-and-so told me. Repeating. Repeaters. And we repeated ourselves into a state of total acquiescence to the movie version of reality in vast numbers of people. We have teacher repeaters who take what they've learned at teacher training college or whatever, they take what they're told to teach in the curriculum, and they teach it, repeating. All over society, it's just repeaters. How do you know that? Well, it says that in this book. Well, how does he know that? Doctor repeaters, repeating what the drug reps have told them. Repeating what the medical schools have told them. Oh, and don't you dare go out of this little box, otherwise you get struck off. But it's working, I don't care. Repeater. Round and round. Scientists repeaters. We've got scientists repeating the song sheet. Global warming goes by carbon emissions because it says so. And then what they don't tell you is enormous and gathering numbers of cutting-edge scientists in their own disciplines are saying, it doesn't. It's the sun. Isn't that amazing? The sun has a connection with Earth temperature. Ooh. Repeater. Then there's journalists. Ooh. Classic repeaters. You see, what real journalists do is they take the official version of events and they look at it and they see if it stands up, and then they communicate that to the people. What repeater journalists do, 90-odd% these days, unfortunately, is they take the official version of events and they turn around and they pass it on to the people. And so instead of being journalists, they are simply public relations officers for the official version of events and life. And then there's politician repeaters. These politicians who don't say what they believe, don't stand up for what they believe, because that, if they go against their party, will mean that they won't progress and become a minister, and their careers will be affected. So they become voting fodder for the tiny few who are deciding what's going to happen. And while all this goes on, all this comes together, all this obsession and acceptance of the movie version of reality, day by day, the Orwellian state stamps its jackboot closer and closer to global fascism. H.L. Mencken again said, "The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable." Why is that? Because governments are not there to serve people. They are there to control people and direct people down a certain agenda road. And once you appreciate that that's what the relationship is between government and people, control, what is happening today begins to make more and more sense when you connect the dots. We have the movie version of events, which hear on the television news and in the newspapers and stuff. And then we have the secret agenda behind the scenes, which is obscured and covered by the movie version of events. And without puppet people, it could not be possible. Follow the white rabbit. Believe what you're told to believe. Think that war is peace, even if you can't spell. That you're a moron if you're against slaughtering the innocent. And as Orwell said, believe that war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. And amazing things are allowed to happen by the vast majority, by the very few. You can pepper bomb cities of civilians and get away with it. This is what they don't want you to see. What's really happening in these wars of freedom. That's what's really happening. What do they want you to see? Hey, here's a game show. Watch this. Shut up. Hey, honey, I think he's going for the car. Liberation. This is what they don't want you to see about what's really happening. Instead, let's have a moral debate about Janet Jackson's breast at the Super Bowl. I'm morally outraged that this should happen. There was a moral outrage across America when this happened at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago or so. Where's the moral outrage? Where's the real immorality? This is what depleted uranium does to Iraqi kids. But never mind, hey, Jerry Springer's on. Hey, we've got some boneheads here being manipulated to have a fight on live television. Hey, honey, he's going to hit him. It's a mind game. People said in very large numbers in the early 1990s that I was crazy, insane, having a midlife crisis. I'm sure many people still think the same. But I tell you what, if I am seen as sane by a world this crazy, I'm disappointed. It seems, like I say, desperately confusing and bewildering, this world, because we don't have the coordinates. I'm just going to go through a few. Coordinate number one, let's get this one out the way. The biggest terrorists are not in the street, they're in government. At best, terrorists in the street can kill a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 or so sometimes. What they can't do is impose sanctions on Iraq during the 1990s, which according to UN figures alone cost the lives of 500,000 Iraqi children. They can't pepper bomb Baghdad. They can't slaughter and maim what is now estimated to be in excess of 1 million people in Iraq since 2003. Terrorists in the street are not in the same league as terrorists in government. coordinate, oh no, it's a definition of terrorist. This is an interesting one. Oxford Concise Dictionary, how appropriate. One who favours or uses terror-inspiring methods of governing or coercing government or community, hence terrorism. Precisely. Coordinate number 2. The goal is a centrally controlled global fascist dictatorship, which has been worked towards for a very, very long time. The reason it seems to be happening quicker and quicker now is they're getting closer and closer to it. And it's an interesting little truism. The more you centralize power, the more power you then have to centralize even quicker. And that's why the speed of centralization has got faster and faster and faster throughout the last century and into this one. This is the basic structure that they're looking for. A world government that would control all major decisions in the world. Controlling a world central bank that would control global finance. A global currency which would not be cash in the end, it would be purely electronic money, for which there are fundamental implications for freedom. Because if you go into a shop now and you hand over electronic money and they say, no, won't accept your card, this computer won't accept your card, then at least you can still just say, well, I'll pay cash then. Once cash is gone, that's what the cashless society is all about, that computer decides if you eat or not. They want a world army which would impose the will of the world government. This is what they're evolving NATO and other amalgamation of armies into. It's supposed to defend Western Europe. That was just Western Europe, nothing to worry about. Now it's in Afghanistan. As I predicted in my books years ago, they would find more and more excuses to expand NATO's sphere of operation. And somebody said to me, a journalist said to me, why do they want a world army? Because there'd be no one to fight. Well, what about any country that says, no, we're not accepting the will of the world government? There we go. Under this structure, they want the European Union, which of course is now massively advanced, the American Union, the North American Union, Mexico, America, and Canada is well advanced behind the scenes. The Pacific Union, the Asia-Pacific Union, and the African Union, which they already have. And under that would become nation states which they want in the end to break up into regions so that there's no unity of defiance to the edifice of power above them. And the reason for centralization of power is very simple. Any dictatorship that wants to control the many from the few has to centralize decision-making. The more diversity of decision-making there is, the less control any central power is going to have over it. And you look in every area of our lives, centralization of power is going on and on and on. So when we're looking at identity cards, I mentioned on that previous slide, the last point there was the microchip population. When we look at identity cards, that's not the end. That's just the stepping stone. I said years ago, way back in the early 90s, to much hilarity, that the agenda was to create a microchipped population linked to a global computer. Well, people ain't laughing anymore because microchipping is becoming more and more prevalent. The ID card is only part of the move towards it. The idea is for microchip people. In the end, babies microchipped at birth after they leave the womb as part of the birth process. Barcoded people. And these microchips are going to be much smaller than this as they progress. This is a story from UPI, which I'll read to you if you can't see it at the back. The US Department of Health and Human Services said Thursday that it was about to begin testing a new technology designed to help more closely monitor and assist the nation's homeless population. See, that's what they do when they're bringing these things in. Start with the most vulnerable groups and then expand it out to the whole population. Under the pilot program, which grew out of a series of policy academies held in the last 2 years, homeless people in participating cities will be implanted with mandatory radio frequency identification tags that social workers and police can use to track their movements. Data from these tracking stations mounted on telephone poles will be transmitted to police and social service workers who will use custom Windows NT software to track movements of the homeless in real time. In what has become a chronic social problem, people living in shelters and on the streets do not seek adequate medical care and frequently contribute to the rising crime rate in major cities. Supporters of these subdermal chips tracking say the technology will discourage implanted homeless men and women from committing crimes while making it easier for government workers to provide social services such as delivering food and medicine. Oh, that's very kind of them. This is the world that we're so rapidly moving into. Same shit, different asshole. Except this is fascism at the technological cutting edge, which allows more control than ever Hitler could get. Coordinate 3. How do they do this? The power of the pyramid. You can also use the symbolism of the spider's web, but the pyramid will work, because that's how it operates. The system operates in its structure a system of pyramids within pyramids, like Russian dolls, one doll inside a bigger doll, inside a bigger doll, inside a bigger doll. They have pyramids inside bigger pyramids, inside bigger pyramids. If you look at any organization today, this university, for instance, any government, any business, any corporation, they're structured as a pyramid. At the bottom, you've got the vast majority of the people working for that organization. And as you go up the pyramid, you're meeting fewer and fewer people, but they know more and more about the agenda than those below them. It goes the other way and the other way, of course. And then eventually, you get to the capstone of the pyramid, the organization, and there are the tiny few people who are the only people that know how it all fits together and know what the real agenda is. Everyone else is at different levels of ignorance for what the organization's really about. And the idea is to hoard knowledge, some of it very, very advanced knowledge, went beyond anything we see in the public arena, in the hands of the few, and to keep the mass of the people in ignorance of that knowledge. And if I know really significant things, like the nature of reality and how we create it, and I keep it from everyone else, I am suddenly in a position of massive power. Because of this pyramid system, the network of interbreeding bloodline families going way back to the ancient world, they occupy the capstone of the pyramid. The people we think are in control, like prime ministers, presidents, heads of the World Bank, etc., they're much lower. They are not the people in power. They are the people who are placed in positions to administer into reality the policy dictated from the shadows, from people that the mass of the population have no awareness even exist, let alone how they're manipulating the system. So people focus on Bush, and they say, oh, it's Bush, he's a vehicle. He's not Big Brother. He's just a guy who's placed in a position of power for a short period of time, 8 years or so, and then he'll be replaced by someone else who will do the same job. What doesn't change is the force behind the people we see who are dictating the policy, which is why the policy doesn't change when governments do. This is the pyramid within pyramid system. The banking system is a pyramid. You go into a bank, the person you hand your check over to won't know what's happening in the bank manager's office behind them. He won't know what's happening at the next level and the next level until you get to the clique at the top of the bank, and they're the only people that know how all the different contributions fit together. Because the vast majority of people, like 90-odd% of people, who are daily making contributions in various ways to building this global prison state have no idea they are doing it or the end that is behind it. Only the few at the top do. So you've got people in all these different organizations and institutions who are making their contributions every day. They're not trying to build a fascist state. They've got children who are going to have to live in it. But they don't know how their individual contributions, innocent in themselves, how they fit together to create anything but an innocent pattern. Only they do. And so, by controlling the top of these various pyramids of institutions within society, they dictate a common policy. And at the heart of that is the constant and incessant centralization of power, so the few have more and more power with every passing week. This is the top of the pyramid, manipulating those representing the top of the pyramid in the movie to create the manipulation that takes us down the road to tyranny. And if you look at the Masonic structure, or any structure of any secret society, it's just the same. Because alongside this network of interbreeding families, you have the secret society network, which they use to make sure either they or their gophers occupy the positions of power. So here you have the Masonic structure. The vast majority of Freemasons, because people say, it's the Freemasons. No, it's not. The vast majority of Freemasons haven't got a clue what their organization's part of. Only the few do. These different secret societies, like the Freemasons, the Knights of Malta, the Knights Templar, all these different ones, they feed the chosen few up into this other pyramid that I'll call the Illuminati pyramid, but these organizations don't like to give themselves names, because you try researching an organization that doesn't have a name. Not easy, so you have to give it one. But Illuminati is one they do use. And it's at this level of the game where the real knowledge is and the real manipulation comes from. So even the vast majority of people in secret societies have no clue what it's all about. This is Albert Pike, infamous and famous Freemason in America, absolutely almost worshipped by the Freemasonic community in America. And he said this: fictions are necessary to the people, and the truth becomes deadly to those who are not strong enough to contemplate it in all its brilliance. In fact, what can there be in common between the vile multitude and sublime wisdom? The truth must be kept secret, and the masses need a teaching proportioned to their imperfect reason. That is exactly the game. To keep that knowledge in the hands of the few and the mass of the people in ignorance of that knowledge. Coordinate 3, techniques of manipulation that take them along the road to this Orwellian state. If I've made any contribution at all in the last 20 years, I think one of the things that has had the biggest impact was to invent the term problem, reaction, solution for something that was known before as the Hegelian dialectic. And it describes a technique of mass manipulation that is devastatingly simple and devastatingly effective. I'm about to describe 9/11. What happens, this is the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, by the way. They have a motto, ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. That is problem, reaction, solution. Creating the problem, then offering the solution to it. After 9/11, George Bush said, "You're free and freedom is beautiful, and you know it'll take time to restore chaos and order out of chaos, but we will." Problem, reaction, solution is that same thing, order out of chaos. Works like this. You want to change the world in a way that you know if you do it openly, you're going to get a massive public resistance, like all these Orwellian changes that are going on today. So you don't do it openly. You play this technique. Stage 1, you covertly create a problem. It could be a terrorist event, it could be a war, it could be a run on a currency, whatever suits the solution you want to provide. You then tell, and we come back to what I was talking about earlier, you then tell the public through an unquestioning mainstream media, overwhelmingly with honourable exceptions, the version of that problem that you want them to believe, i.e. Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy with a bullet that turned corners. That amazingly efficient, effective terror on 9/11 was orchestrated from some guy in a cave in Afghanistan. Hope he had a mobile phone. You want people to believe, you have to create a false villain to hide the fact that you're really behind it. You want the public at stage 2 to react with fear, with outrage, and words to the effect of, something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? At which point you, who have covertly created the problem, glean that public reaction, or at least the acceptance that something must be done. You then offer openly the solutions to the problems you have yourself created. This is why Tony Blair said after 9/11, the world has changed and never will be the same again. It wasn't meant to be the same again. If you look at the two world wars, the Second World War here, if you look after the First World War, the power in the world was in far fewer hands than it was before the start. We had the first attempt at a global body, the League of Nations. After the Second World War, power was in dramatically fewer hands than it was before the start, with the World Bank and the IMF and all these global institutions that emerged. And what you had, and I go into this in great detail in my books, you had the same force behind the Nazis and funding them, and you had the same force funding the Soviet Union, funding Britain, funding America. There's a guy, I said in my books years ago that the Bush family, through a guy called Prescott Bush, who is the grandfather of the current president, funded Hitler to a massive extent through a bank called the Union Banking Corporation, which interfaced with the banking and steel empire of a guy called Fritz Thyssen, who was acknowledged as one of the major funders of Hitler. And people just kind of dismissed this and, oh no, can't be. And then a guy came out who is the head of the Holocaust Museum down in Florida, who came out publicly and said, yeah, the Bush family's fortune came from funding the Nazis through Prescott Bush. So you fund both sides, you bring them into a war, and then that changes society forever. And at the end of the war, you say, look, we've had 2 world wars in just a few years here, and the people are tired and in a desperate state, waiting for any solution to this problem. So, what was the solution? An explosion of globally centralized institutions, which today are massively part of the Orwellian state. This is what one of the major Nazis said. Why, of course, the people don't want war? Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back up to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for their lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country and in any generation. Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. He who molds opinion is greater than he who enacts the laws. Well, if you mold opinion, you can then enact any laws you want. It's all a mind game. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. All propaganda must be so popular and on such an intellectual level that even the most stupid of those towards whom it is directed will understand it. People can be made to perceive paradise as hell and the other way round, to consider the most wretched sort of life as paradise. So it's all a mind game. That's what problem, reaction, solution is. And there's another version now, no problem, reaction, solution. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You don't even need a real problem, just the perception of one to justify the action that was taken. And if you'll note, they've been desperately running around trying to manufacture a problem with Iran so that they can provide the solution. This is Donald Rumsfeld, the defense secretary in America when the war on terror was launched and everything, and the war with Iraq. In 1983, he went to Saddam Hussein on behalf of the Reagan-Bush administration to arrange for the shipment of biological and chemical weapons to Iraq, the very same weapons that were used against the Kurds. It came out in government documents in 2002. This was a newspaper report. Donald Rumsfeld, the US Defense Secretary and one of the most strident critics of Saddam Hussein, met the Iraqi president in 1983 to ease the way for US companies to sell biological and chemical weapons, including anthrax and bubonic plague cultures, according to newly declassified US government documents. Donald Rumsfeld was also on the board of a company called ABB, European engineering giant, when they sold nuclear technology to North Korea. And when Rumsfeld became defense secretary, he used the fact that there was a nuclear situation in North Korea to target that country and condemn that country. This is how problem, reaction, solution works. Create the problem and then offer the solution. The other technique that runs alongside this, I call the totalitarian tiptoe. You know from the start that you're going from A to Z. But you know if you go in giant leaps, people are going to look up and say, what's going on? Because the change is so vast and clear. So what you do with a totalitarian tiptoe is you go in little steps, as big as you can get away with, mind, and every single step is projected to the people as unconnected to all the others. That's how we went in Europe from a free trade area, good for jobs, nothing to worry about, into what is now a centralized superstate, and they ain't finished yet. The totalitarian tiptoe. This is how we're going in changes in legislation day after day after day to the Orwellian society. Except that since 9/11 it's more like the totalitarian sprint. I hear people, I've heard people say over the years that what that David Icke guy is saying about this global conspiracy, centralized power and all that stuff, a load of rubbish. And then I see the same people going, stop globalization, stop globalization. What is globalization? It is the public face of the very agenda that I've been talking about for nearly 20 years. The agenda of centralizing power on a global level in every area of our lives. I know some people, good luck to them. They get to the level of transnational corporations and they say that's the reason for globalization. Transnational corporations, greed, that's what's behind it. But there's another step to take when you realize that through the pyramid within pyramid structure, the transnational corporations in the end are controlled by the same people. They are different masks on the same face again. The transnational corporations are not the engine room for globalization, they are the vehicle for it. And in all areas of our lives, like I say, I've traveled quite a bit. You see even the physical culture of countries. I was in Japan 2 weeks ago. Even the visual, physical structure of countries is now looking the same all over the world. So when we see these protests about the World Bank and the IMF and the mayhem that they're creating and the World Trade Organization, what we need to understand is that it's part of a coordinated agenda for centralization on a much greater level than has been envisaged yet, where you start to connect everything. And the thing is that once you take away an area, call it a country, whatever you like, once you take away its ability to make its own decisions and to be self-sufficient in making those decisions, you have created the end of freedom for that country, that area, whatever you talk about. If you look at Britain now, we can't even cough without the European Union agrees. And because of the World Trade Organization, countries can't even defend their own economies from other parts of the world. And this is not by accident, but by design. Because when you take away people's ability to make decisions within their own sphere, country, whatever, community, you are making them dependent on a global system that they have no control over. Exactly. And who has control over them within the global system? Anyone that controls the global system. And it's a dramatically few people. Like I say, there's one agenda going on behind the scenes, and there's the movie. Oh no, it's just free trade. I love free trade. I love that one. Free trade. That's the freedom to exploit some of the poorest people in the world, to make your products at a few cents on the dollar, and then bring them across the world with as little tariff barrier as possible, because it's free trade. Everyone's in favor of that. And then sell it for the highest price you can in another part of the world. It's not free trade, it's freedom to exploit. Free trade is Orwellian newspeak to mislead us to what it really means. I'll give you an example of how this is planned in advance and is not just random. In September 2000, there was an organization called the Project for the New American Century that produced a document of where it wanted America to go as soon as possible. This is before the Bush administration. It was a few months, 2 months before it won the election. The Project for the New American Century was created in the 1990s by people like Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Wolfowitz, the Deputy Defense Secretary at the time of 9/11 and the War on Terror. Also among the creating people of this organization were those that became known as neocons or neoconservatives in the Bush administration when it came in. In that document in September 2000, it called for American armed forces to be the cavalry on the new American frontier. Bush is not even in power yet. He certainly ain't talking about this in his election campaign. The document said that key allies like the United Kingdom were the most effective and efficient means of exercising American global leadership. It says the United States has for decades sought to play a more permanent role in Gulf regional security. While the unresolved conflict with Iraq provides immediate justification, the need for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. It called for a blueprint for maintaining global US preeminence and shaping the international security order in line with America's principles and interests. In other words, the clique that controls America. This grand American strategy, it said, must be advanced as far into the future as possible, and the US must fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous theater wars, major theater wars, as a core mission. All these things unfolded when the Bush administration came in, because the people behind the Project for the New American Century and this agenda came in with the Bush administration. It talked about peacekeeping missions demanding American political leadership rather than the United Nations. It happened. It highlighted North Korea, Syria, Iran and Libya as dangerous regimes and said that their existence justified the creation of a worldwide command and control system, World Army. This guy, David Frum, was the man who wrote the speech when Bush talked about the axis of evil, which was North Korea, Iraq and Iran, straight off the pages of the Project for the New American Century. It spotlighted China for regime change eventually, saying it's time for a presence of American forces in Southeast Asia. This could lead to American and Allied power providing the spur to the process of democratization in China. It called for the creation of US space forces to dominate space and total control of cyberspace to prevent their enemies using the internet. Now we're seeing the internet being targeted more and more to stop the free flow of information. It talked of developing biological weapons that can target specific genotypes. And this may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. This is the mentality behind the people behind the war on terror. And then it said this: for this agenda, this process of transformation, as it called it, to happen in a reasonably short time, there had to be some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. This was in September 2000. This process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year to the month after that document was published, and 9 months after the people behind it came to power with Bush, America had what Bush called at the time our Pearl Harbor, 9/11. As a result of that, I go into that in detail in this book, which I wrote some time ago. As a result of that 9/11 horror, the great list of things in that document have been justified into place by that event. This is the guy, the United Nations ambassador at the time, who was pressing the case to invade Afghanistan and all the rest of it. This is the people behind this. John Pilger in the New Statesman said of this guy, John Negroponte, how appropriate that John Negroponte is Bush's ambassador at the United Nations. This week he delivered America's threat to the world that it may require to attack more and more countries. As US ambassador to Honduras in the early 1980s, Negroponte oversaw American funding of the regime's death squads, known as Battalion 316, that wiped out the democratic opposition, while the CIA ran its Contra war of terror against neighboring Nicaragua. Murdering teachers and slitting the throats of midwives were a speciality. These are the people that launched the war on terror. He later became head of US operations in Iraq and head of US intelligence. Because there is the movie, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and there's a secret agenda doing what we need to justify the agenda. After 9/11, we had Bush saying, we must get Bin Laden. But that's the last thing they wanted. This is a guy called Michael Springman, US consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia at the time of Father George Bush. In Saudi Arabia, I was repeatedly ordered by high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants. These were essentially people who had no ties either to Saudi Arabia or to their own country. I complained bitterly at the time there. I returned to the US, I complained to the State Department here, to the General Accounting Office, to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and to the Inspector General's Office. I was met with silence. What I was protesting was, in reality, an effort to bring recruits rounded up by Osama bin Laden to the US for terrorist training by the CIA. They would then be returned to Afghanistan to fight the then Soviets. Greg Palast, a real journalist, in his report on Newsnight at the time, I received a phone call from a high-placed member of a US intelligence agency. He tells me that while there's been constraints on investigating Saudis under George Bush, it's gotten much worse. After the elections, The agencies were told to back off investigating the bin Ladens and Saudi royals, and that angered agents. This was in the period before 9/11, in the months before 9/11. And Robin Cook, the former Foreign Secretary, who unfortunately died of a heart attack when he had lots of things to say on this, he said in a Guardian article just before he died, throughout the 80s, bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally the computer file of thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with the help of the CIA to defeat the Russians. They created the problem and then offer the solution, which is a war on terror that, by its very nature, is a war you can never say has ended. A war without end. And here we have Barack Obama. The man behind him, his foreign policy advisor, Brzezinski, is the man who has publicly admitted that he orchestrated the manipulation of the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, which kicked the whole thing off. Whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, Labour or Conservative, the same force is running the show. The official story of 9/11 is a monstrosity. It is an insult to the intelligence. And what's interesting is that today, more and more people, particularly in America, major academics and people like that at various universities, are some of the key people who are forensically taking apart the official story of 9/11, which, I have to say, is not difficult because it's so ludicrous. Not one strand fits to the other. This is a headscarf that was supposed to be in a plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, Flight 93. You know, it's not even dirty. Oh, but it's an exhibit. We found it. Hardly any records, but we found that. And then there was the passport, the hijacker's passport, which the FBI called a press conference to tell the world they had found near Ground Zero, that had been in one of the planes that crashed. A long and dirty war, said Cheney, a war without end. A war without end in justifying the Orwellian state unfolding. See, because it's a mind game, it's not just a mind game, it's an emotional game. To a very large extent, problem, reaction, solution is manipulation of emotion. And the key emotion that entices people to give their power away more than any other is fear. People who are in fear of something give their power away to anyone they think will protect them from what they've been manipulated to fear. The more we can be persuaded to be frightened, the more likely we are to acquiesce to apparent solutions to that which we are frightened of. They need to put us into a mentality of fear and survival, fear of not surviving, fear of tomorrow, fear of meeting the check at the end of the month, paying the mortgage, meeting the rent, fear of whether you're going to lose your job, fear of the economy, fear of terrorism, fear of global warming. Oh my God. We're being bombarded with reasons to fear because that is the key controlling force above all else. And we've got a choice. We've always got a choice between acquiescing to that fear and in doing so acquiescing to this Orwellian state, or dropping our obsession with fear, lifting our heads and doing something about it. Like stopping cooperating with the building of our own prison. Since 9/11, the Orwellian state has gone into orbit. Latest figures, and they are the latest because it ain't over yet, is that when you walk through the average city in Britain today, you're seen on average by about 300 cameras. They're now talking about iris scans, fingerprints, DNA databases. It's the totalitarian tiptoe. This, after the London bombings, this came up around London. Secure beneath watchful eyes. And that's a poster from Nazi Germany justifying more control and taking freedoms away to protect the people. Someone sent me this week, this is at Sheffield bus station in Yorkshire. DNA, spit and run, you'll still get caught. DNA, every bus, tram and interchange has DNA testing kits. Spit at the staff and you can be traced and prosecuted, even if you don't know, we don't know what you look like. And your records will be on the national database forever. You now go on the DNA national database, not for being charged with anything, not for being convicted with anything, but for being arrested for anything. There you go. Watch the terrorists among you. Turn the people to police the people. I promise never to question authority or bring up my rights. Stop asking questions. Quiet. Shut up. Hey, here's a free speech zone. How about that? See, there is freedom. Just nowhere near anyone else. I mean, this is not sometime over the rainbow, maybe eventually. This is unfolding before our eyes by the day now. This is what Hitler said to justify the creation of the Gestapo. An evil exists that threatens every man, woman and child of this great nation. We must take steps to ensure our domestic security and protect our homeland. That is almost word for word what they said to justify the creation of what they call Homeland Security in America. And we're now talking about Homeland Security in this country. It's become the new stock phrase, like I say. The technological version of what we've already seen, but on a global level. Hello, elephant in the living room. And like I keep coming back to, it's a mind game, because mind, if you control someone's mind, you control their behavior, their perception, everything. And what all this is doing on a deeper level of the psyche is turning us in, that's the idea and the attempt, to turn us into the equivalent of laboratory rats in a maze. They do these horrific experiments, I think they're horrific, just my view, where they'll have mice or rats going up and down this maze, and they'll go down certain channels and they'll get a shock. And they'll go again and they get a shock and they turn back. And eventually they've been shocked so many times that they don't go down that channel anymore. You take the electrical equipment away, they can go down the channel without being shocked. They don't go. Because they have been manipulated into acquiescence, manipulated into line. And what is happening to us all the time, more and more, is we're being told what we can't do this, we can't do that. You can't say that. Political correctness, Orwellian's newspeak, in other words. You can't say this, you can't do that. Oh no, you can't go there. Oh yes, you can't put that in your waste bin. You've got to put it here. You've got to put there. There's a fine if you do that. And what it's all doing, speed cameras. Oh crikey, you know, the speed camera. What am I doing? And it's getting more and more and more and more, and it's the equivalent of all these shocks on the laboratory rat, and eventually you can fall into a state of total subservience and acquiescence. And that's the idea. It's a mind game. One other thing, before I kind of change direction in the last little bit. This has become another buzz phrase, international law. I hear it all the time. Do you know, I heard people, the time of the invasion of Iraq, saying the invasion was wrong because it was against international law. So, if international law said it was all right to go and slaughter the innocent on a vast scale, that's all right then. No, of course it's not. International law is irrelevant to that. Immorality is what we should be talking about. Not that it's against international law. But what is international law? It is a law that everyone on the planet has to obey. What do you need if you want a centralized global dictatorship? You need laws that everyone on the planet has to obey. That's why international law is being talked about in an ever-increasing way all the time, because that's the road to the central tyranny. So anything that can be used to justify international law is a good thing from their point of view. What better than a global war on terrorism? We must have international law to protect everyone from terrorists. What better than global warming caused by the carbon explanation? Oh, we must have international law to meet this threat. Anything that Al Gore's involved in is a scam. Anyone who's done any looking at his background. So international law, you're going to hear more and more and more about. Not only international law, but the need to unify and bring together regulations on this and that and the other in each country on all these different topics. Oh no, you've got different regulations in that country to that country on this, so we must have conformity of global regulations. We're seeing this all the time. Again, building the global centralized state. More and more. And this is as relevant today as when these words were spoken by an anti-Nazi activist, pastor, who said this after the Second World War. First they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for me, and by then there was no one left to speak out for me. And we're seeing this all the time, where they're targeting certain groups, and everyone else, because, oh, I'm not part of that group, it doesn't affect me, looks the other way, and they pick them off, and pick them off, and pick them off. And that's what's happening all the time. And yet, what I've been describing, and I could talk at much greater length and often do, is a house of flipping cards. That's what it is. This edifice of global power that I've been describing is a house of cards because it depends on our acquiescence to allow it to happen. The number of people who are knowingly advancing this manipulation compared with the global population is tiny, infinitesimally small at the top of that pyramid. And they can only have power because we give that power away all the time, every day. If someone introduces a law and people just moan about it but get on with their lives, then the people that introduced the law have taken the power over the people. When people see a law that's unfair and in some kind of unity say, we're not having this, we're not doing this, we're not accepting this, this is fascism. Where's the power? If someone comes out of the White House or Downing Street and they say, well, we've had a discussion and we've decided we're going to do this. If enough people say, no, we're not, where's their power? They have no power. Their power is in people saying, oh, bloody another fascist law, look, what can you do though? One of the reasons that the poll tax law had to be changed in the time of Margaret Thatcher is because for once the effect of it went across income brackets and classes. So middle class people were affected by it as well as working class people. And therefore we had some kind of unity in resisting it. What happened? They had to change it. This is what we need to do, is stop being divided and ruled on the basis of class and religion and color and all this crap, and start some kind of unity. Because we can either accept Big Brother, or we can say we're not having it. And if we don't come together and say we're not having it, then I'm 56. I think I said earlier. What have I got? 10 years left, 20 if I'm lucky? But the people in this room, most of them, you're going to have to live most of your lives under this stuff. My grandchildren are. My children are. And it's no good looking back when all these structures of control are in place and saying, I wish I'd have done something then. One of the things we can do is stop bloody joining the sodding army for a start. Albert Einstein said, the pioneers of a warless world are the youth who refuse military service. It's the guys that declare wars never fight them. Have you noticed that? If George Bush had been on the front line when the first bullet was fired, he'd been under a bed in Houston when the second bugger went off. Oh no, we declare wars, you go and fight them. But more than anything, we need to free our minds. Because it's through our minds that this control, this acquiescence, this herd mentality that allows this to happen is unfolding. It's an interesting question. Who's deciding what's happening in our heads all the time? Who's deciding what we think we're deciding? When we're constantly programmed, constantly hypnotized to see the world in a certain way and to see ourselves in a certain way. Even from the earliest ages it starts. The programming of reality and the microchip. I'll tell you a quick story about microchips. In 1997, I got a call from someone I know asking if I would meet a CIA scientist in America because he wanted to tell me things that he wanted to get out into the public domain, but he couldn't do it for reasons that became obvious. So I met him, and he told me the story of how he joined the CIA. He's a cutting-edge scientist, apparently, in the area of magnetics. And he thought he was serving his country. Down the bottom of the pyramid, I'm serving my country. He soon realized that the agenda that I'm talking about is actually happening and being orchestrated behind the scenes. And he rebelled and said, I'm not working for you anymore. He then leaves his house and then shortly afterwards has complete missing time until he woke up on a medical type bench in a room, and as he got his faculties back, he started to realize there's something stuck to his chest. And as he was telling me this story, he was opening his shirt, and on his chest was this see-through, almost like a shampoo sachet, I suppose you could call it, and inside was this orangey golden liquid. They're known in the CIA as patches. Someone's been patched. And he told me that what they do is the drug in this patch, the body is manipulated to need to survive. And it lasts for 72 hours and has to be replaced. And if it's not replaced, you start to die a very unpleasant death. And he tried it after he was patched, and he's sure they weren't kidding. And what he was told is, you work for us, or we remove the patch. And he said there are endless numbers of scientists in the really secret projects in America, I guess elsewhere too, who are patched for this reason. And so he was trying to get out what was happening because he couldn't. And what he told me was, tell people if they say no to one thing, say no to the microchip. Because he said even people who have begun to wake up to what's going on are seeing the microchip as just electronic tagging. It is not. That is only part of it, knowing where people are all the time, as with that example earlier. The main thrust and the main reason for microchipping, he said, is not the messages going from the chip to the computer, it's the messages coming the other way. And he said that through this process, and he told me then that microchips outside the public arena were so small people wouldn't believe it. Well, we're now seeing that that's true, all these years later. He said that from a microchipped person, from a microchip in a person, they can manipulate them mentally, emotionally, and physically from a distance through the chip. And that's the idea, to get inside the body computer, if you like, and externally manipulate its thought and emotional processes and its physical state. The Matrix movies I found very interesting. There were lots of very good symbolism in there, where the Neo character is told by the Morpheus character that he's a slave and that he needs to recognize he's a slave. And that's the first step to freedom. The first step to freedom within this gathering Orwellian world is to realize that we are in a gathering Orwellian world, because once that realization comes, then we start to see the bars. We're no longer sitting in a cell without bars thinking we're free. We can start to see the bars. Once you see the bars, you can start to think, well, what do I do about it? And then the next thing, that we want to be free. That we don't want to be sheep anymore. That we want to take our minds back. That we want to have our own opinions and our own views, and not those that are bombarded at us daily through education and through the media and all the other sources of so-called information. And then there's the transformation, where you open your mind and break the spell that so many people are under, the hypnotic spell of seeing the world in a certain way. And when you realize, or you start to transform, you realize a staggering fact, which the cutting edge of science is now beginning even to identify, that this world we think is physical is an illusion. It's an illusion. There is no out there in terms of physical things that we perceive out there. What is out there are just frequency fields which we are decoding into a holographic reality that only exists in our minds. It's like the same principle as a television. The only place that television exists as we perceive television, which is programs on the screen, in pictures, is on the screen. Everywhere else, television is frequency fields and electrical circuits. The only place that the internet exists as we perceive the internet, in graphics and texts and websites, is on the computer screen. Everywhere else, they are electronic circuits, etc. And our reality is a reality that we decode from frequency fields into apparently a physical world, but it's just a holographic illusion. And therefore, if you know that that's what we're doing, and the population have no idea that that's what they're doing, you are suddenly in an extraordinarily powerful place to manipulate how we perceive reality en masse. I mean, these pictures, very simple pictures, are actually flat pictures on a pavement, which look three-dimensional because of the way our brain reads them. That pinky color is exactly the same in both lines, but our brain reads them differently because of the way it's laid out and the colors around them. Most people will read this as a bird in the bush because that's what it appears to say. It actually says a bird in the bush. The brain has decoded it on the basis of what it thinks should be there. Some people will see optical at the top, some people will see illusion. Some people will see good, some people will see evil. It's the way our brain decodes reality. These are real simple examples, but it gets much more complex. As Einstein said, reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. This world that we think is kind of infinite is like a television channel, holographic television channel. In the space that I'm occupying now are all the television channels and radio station frequencies broadcasting to Oxford. I can't see them, they can't see each other because they're operating on different wavelengths. You get a television or a radio and tune it to one of those wavelengths, bingo, that's your station, that's your reality. Move the dial, another station, new reality, but the station you've just moved from hasn't ceased to broadcast, it's simply broadcasting in exactly the same way, but you're not tuned to it anymore. These physical bodies lock us in to a frequency range, a lens through which we perceive reality, which we call the physical world. In the same space that we're occupying are infinite other frequencies of reality, and we ourselves, in terms of consciousness, are infinite. But when we work through a physical body, that infinite consciousness that we are works through a tiny lens. Guess it's about experience, who knows? And when you start to identify that this body, this vehicle, this biological computer is who we are, you get locked in the 5 sense prison pretty damn fast. Once you realize you are consciousness having an experience through this physical body, your mind starts to open and see that we are infinite, not Bill Bloggs or Charlie Smith, I've got no power, I'm just Joe Public. There's a wonderful American comedian. Have you come across this guy, Bill Hicks? Genius he was. And he said this as part of a joke, but he was a very profound man. All matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration. We're all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death, life is just a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. And the key to mass control is the manipulation of the imagination of ourselves. The manipulation of how we decode reality into the perception of the world we see. People say seeing is believing. Actually, believing is seeing because our belief systems affect the way the brain decodes reality. Endless research on this to show that that's the case. As William Blake said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. But through the lens of the physical body, particularly the manipulated one, it seems anything but that. It seems that everything's apart from everything else and there is no unity. As this guy, H.M. Tomlinson, said, we see things not as they are, but as we are. And if you can manipulate what we are, you manipulate the way we see the world. And we are encouraged to see the world in a state of division, of apartness. I am apart from you. I have no connection because you're there and there's space in between us. This is where the unity disappears and you get into a thing where it's dog eat dog and every man for himself. Competition, I must win. Division. When we are all one consciousness, experiencing itself subjectively, having an experience through different physical forms. But we are one consciousness that has been set at war with itself by the manipulation of divide and rule and all these other things. The body's a biological computer. It has the ability to think to a very high level itself. And if we drop into what I call body consciousness, where we perceive everything only through the five senses, then we lock into that body level of consciousness which can perceive only this world and sees the world in terms of division, of apartness, of disunity. When we become conscious, you start to see that everything is one. We're all expressions of each other. René Descartes, talking about self-identity, said, "I think, therefore I am." I would suggest it's more like, "I compute, therefore I am." Because these computers are programmable. You can program them to decode reality in a way that suits the agenda. And they have massively. Someone like Paul McKenna, simple things that he does, programs the brain to decode reality in the way that it has been manipulated and programmed to do so. Whether you saw this thing on Top Gear some years ago, where he got this guy Hammond in this car through hypnosis to believe that he was driving a real Porsche 911. And when Clarkson drove another toy car into it, he reacted as if he'd just done it to his real car. And many other things that he did under hypnosis. Why? Because he had been implanted with a belief which then edited his reality to fit the belief. And this is happening on a mass scale. The human race, overwhelmingly, is under mass hypnosis, programmed to see itself and the world in a certain way. Humanity, asleep. When people start to get it, and start to see the world in a much different way, they use this term, they say, "I woke up." Exactly. Waking up from the trance we've been put into. And what's the biggest hypnotist on planet Earth? The box in the corner of the room, which is constantly telling us what to believe is real, what to believe is possible, what to believe is right, what to believe is wrong, what to believe is moral and immoral, what to believe. Hypnosis is what it is. We see things not as they are, but as we are. And when we see the world only through the five senses, because I'm Joe Bloggs and Ethel Smith, and we drop into body consciousness alone, then we drop into a box of limitation. And once we have stopped connecting with higher levels of our consciousness and observing the world from that point, we only have one place to go to get a fix on who we are and the nature of reality, and that's out there through the eyes and the ears. And who controls that? The mainstream media, the education system. Put them in the box, lock them in body consciousness, then program the computer to see the world the way that suits our agenda. Know thyself. How many people even think about that? Who am I? What am I doing here? What time's EastEnders on, Nonny? This is, I've done a lot of research on near-death experiences and what people have experienced in the near-death state. And I thought this one was brilliant. This is what one guy said he experienced. Everything from the beginning, my birth, my ancestors, my children, my wife, everything comes together simultaneously. I saw everything about me and about everyone who was around me. I saw everything they were thinking now, what they thought then, what was happening before, what was happening now. There was no time, there is no sequence of events, no such thing as limitation, of distance, of period, of time, of place. I could be anywhere I wanted to be simultaneously. How could he say that? Because he had withdrawn from the lens of the body computer that locks us into this tiny frequency range called visible light that we think is everything, when it is an infinitesimal fraction of what exists in the very space I'm standing in now. That's who we are, and look what we've allowed ourselves to become by being told what to believe and what to perceive. We live in the equivalent of a holographic internet, as I call it. The world seems so solid, but then they say it's made of atoms which have no solidity. How is that? Because it's an illusion. Solidity is decoded We're decoding the equivalent of the wireless internet. Around me now, around all of us now, is this wireless internet. And we are decoding it into holographic reality that we call the world. That's what it is. We are receiver transmitters of information. And if you can manipulate the computer, you can manipulate what it can perceive and what it can access. You know, one of those shaman people, the tabloid newspapers, he's a witch doctor, stupid, primitive. This is what one of them said. We are perceivers. We are awareness. We are not objects. We have no solidity. We are boundless. We, or rather our reason, forget this, and thus we entrap the totality of ourselves in a vicious circle from which we rarely emerge in our lifetime. We are awareness. That's what we are. And the idea of the manipulators is to limit that awareness as much as possible so that we only see ourselves in limited apartness terms. We are living in a holographic world, a holographic universe, where that's a holographic print. It's basically a frequency field. And when you put a laser on it, bingo, it becomes a three-dimensional, apparently solid form. That's the world we live in. Again, holograms can look as solid as you and me. That's good, because we are holograms at the physical level. That's what we're decoding. That's what reality is. Reality is frequency fields which we decode into this so-called physical world. In the Matrix, he was seeing people like that, and then when he went through that transformation to another level of consciousness, he started seeing people like that on the right. Why? Because that's what we are at the physical level. And manipulating how we do it is the way this world is controlled. This is a wonderful book, I do recommend it, called The Holographic Universe. And there's a wonderful story in there which sums up what I'm saying here. The writer, Michael Talbot, talked about something he experienced when his father had a party and had a stage hypnotist along to do party tricks. What he did was make people eat a potato and think it was an apple. How does he do that? He implants the belief that the person's eating an apple, and we don't taste with the tongue. The tongue passes electrical signals to the brain which are decoded. And the implanted belief decodes the potato into the taste of an apple, and the person tastes the apple. And he got this one guy called Tom, and as he was about to bring him out from the trance state, whatever you want to call it, he said to him, when I bring you back to a waking state, Tom, you're not going to be able to see your daughter in the room. And so before he did that, he led the daughter. Tom was sitting down, and he put the daughter right in front of Tom, so he's looking in his daughter's belly. He brings him out, apparently. Can you see your daughter in the room, Tom? Tom's looking around. No, she's not here. She's giggling, he can't hear her. The hypnotist went behind the daughter and put his hand in the small of her back and said, I'm holding something, Tom. What am I holding? He said, well, you're holding a watch. It was so obvious to him. The daughter's between him and the watch. He said, there's an inscription on the watch, Tom. What does it say? And he peered forward. He read the inscription. His daughter's here. Now, if I said that within mainstream versions of perception and reality and what this world is, people would say it's impossible. But it's not. The only place that room existed in a physical form, holographically, was in Tom's decoded reality. By putting the implanted belief that his daughter was not in the room into Tom's mind/brain, his brain ceased to decode that energy field of the daughter into holographic form. So everyone else in the room was there holographically to be seen as physical, but not his daughter, because he had not decoded her. It's exactly the same principle that in China They cannot access vast amounts of the internet because they are firewalled off. And that's what belief does. It firewalls off perception. And that's why we are bombarded with belief, belief, belief. Not least belief in division instead of unity. So we end up like this. We end up locked in bubbles of imprisoned perception instead of being the free, infinite, multidimensional beings that we really are. And by disturbing the computer, you can distort massively the computer's ability to decode and perceive in the way that it should do. Not least through fear, but the stuff that we're pouring into ourselves and our kids. What is the body? It is an electrical, chemical phenomenon at this level. And what are we doing? We're filling it or bombarding it with electrochemical influences which are distorting its balance and therefore distorting its efficiency to decode reality. Aspartame, this sweetener, it's a brain suppressant. They call an excitotoxin among many other lethal things. Who brought it onto the market? Donald Rumsfeld, when he was head of Searle Pharmaceuticals, made a fortune by selling the rights out to Monsanto. Fluoride, another brain suppressant and excitotoxin to destabilize the efficiency of us to think straight and efficiently. This is what a chemist wrote in 1954 about fluoride, which is in more and more drinking water around the world. In the 1930s, Hitler and the German Nazis envisioned a world to be dominated and controlled by Nazi philosophy of pan-Germanism. The German chemists worked out a very ingenious and far-reaching plan of mass control, which was submitted to and adopted by the German General Staff. This plan was to control the population in any given area through mass medication of drinking water supplies. By this method, they could control the population in whole areas, reduce population by water medication that would induce sterility in women, and so on. In this scheme of mass control, sodium fluoride occupied a prominent place. Then we're talking about, again, Monsanto with aspartame. It's Monsanto that's behind genetically modified food. What is genetically modified food? It's there to genetically modify us. Vaccines, same. All these things are overpowering the systems of the body, not least the immune system, all the electromagnetic influences too, to turn us into a fraction of the potential that we should be and turn us into the robotic people. And we would never submit to that. This is China today. Germany in the 40s. They just want it on a mass scale. We are consciousness, infinite consciousness, working through the body and having an experience. We are being manipulated to identify with the body as who we are, and therefore we think in terms of limitation, I can't, I could never, and division from our fellow infinite consciousness. Einstein said, you cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. And that's what we're trying to do all the time. One political party creates a mess, the other one says we'll sort out the mess, but they're trying to do it with the same level of consciousness that created the mess just gets worse. So, unless we go through an expansion of consciousness and start to see ourselves and the world in a much greater way than we do now, there's no way that we can stop what is happening, because you can't solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. And these people who are identifying the conspiracy on a 5-sense level, but saying we have to stockpile weapons to fight the Illuminati, they're just trying to solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. They create twice the problems. There is no path to peace. Peace is the path. This is the level of consciousness we've got to start going to. You must be the change you want to be in the world, or see in the world, Gandhi said. Martin Luther King, cowardice asked the question, is it safe? Expediency asked the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. And if I had to say one thing that would change this world dramatically, it's if we started doing what we believe, what we know to be right, and stop doing what we think is right for us in the moment. Because they are the decisions that lock us into this imprisoned reality. What are the consequences for me? Me. Not what is the right thing to do in this situation, but what are the consequences for me in this situation? And if we just started doing what we know to be right instead of what we think is right for us in the moment, then this world would transform because of all that would come from it. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, Martin Luther King said. And that is the antidote to divide and rule. I don't care about your injustice. I don't care about your destruction of freedom of speech, because at this moment I feel I'm being treated justly and I have the freedom to say what I think. That's how, first it was the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. We need to start standing up for the rights of everyone to have freedom, even stands back in amazement those we don't agree with. And then we might have some kind of chance of living in a free society and not an Orwellian state, transforming from this society to this society. And it's a time to choose, because like I say, this ain't coming sometime never. This is unfolding by the day. And I'll finish with this. It's how Bill Hicks, a great man, American comedian, died at the age of 33, I think it was. He used to finish his act like this, talking about life, because he realized that it was all an illusion, and we'd got caught in the trap of thinking the illusion is real. And illusions can only control you when you think they're real. When you know the illusion is an illusion, you can play with it and have fun with it. Great. When you think it's real, that's when it's got you. And he used to say this about life. Life is like a ride in an amusement park. And when you go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. The ride goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some have been on this ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real? Or is this just a ride? Just an illusion we create? And others have remembered, and they come back to us and they say, hey, don't be afraid ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up, I've got a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry and my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try to tell us that and let the demons run amok. But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. No job, no savings or money, just a choice right now between fear and love. And that's all it is. Fear and love. We are living in a world created by this. We will only transform this world with this. And I'll give you a quick example of what I mean with the difference. When someone says, oh, what do we do about this Orwellian state and all this divide and rule and all this war and all the rest of it? This will say, oh, we need a committee meeting, we need minutes. We need to go on a protest march. We need to have the meeting of the UN Security Council. Oh, complexity. Oh, this says, we must love each other. And from that, everything else will come. While this rules, the few will control the many. When this rules, only then shall we be free. Thank you for your time.